everyone, welcome back to my channel. If you are new here, welcome. My name is Kiana and I do a lot of sewing and fashion videos. And today we are going to do a tutorial and I have a pattern on these wide pleated shorts. I use the same fabric as this circle skirt dress, which is a couple videos back. So if you want to make this and you want a pattern for this, I'll put a card and I'll link it down below. But today we are going to be focusing on these shorts. Absolutely perfect for summertime. They're not too short, but if you want them a little longer, you can easily do that by just extending the pattern. And this is perfect for either beginners or intermediate sewers or more advanced sewers because there are a lot of ways that you can make this pattern easier. So for example, this pattern includes pockets on the side seams. If you're not feeling up to the pockets, even though these are an easier type of pocket, you can just totally remove the pockets and sew the side seam normally. Another thing is that there's an extended waistband. You can make it easier for yourself by doing a waistband that ends at the center, and I have that marked on the pattern as well. You do not have to add belt loops if you don't want to, because those can be a little bit challenging to sew on. And then lastly, the fly front is removable. So if you wanted to put in like an invisible zipper in the back and make the waistband opening at the back, you could totally do that as well and turn this from a more intermediate advanced piece into a beginner piece. So this pattern can totally work for you whether you're a beginner or if you're more advanced. So just change it up to your liking because these are the perfect shorts for summer. Seriously, I love them. I'm so excited. I want to make them in more colors. The pattern is the first link down below and you can check it out on Etsy. And if you're wondering what supplies and equipment you'll need for this project, that is also in the first link down below. So yeah, I am super excited about this pattern. I worked really hard on it for you guys. So let's just get into the video. Alright, so first things first, we're going to print our pattern, and when you're printing, make sure you do print it at 100% scale, otherwise it will be a little bit distorted. And to assemble your pattern, just line up the edges of the paper without overlapping, making sure to match the corresponding diamonds. Personally, I like to use cardstock and packing tape. I just find that it gives me a really sturdy pattern piece. I'm going to choose what size to create based off of the size chart in my instruction pamphlet, and then I'm just going to cut on the corresponding line. Then I'm going to repeat this process with all of my pattern pieces. Then I can cut out my fabric. I'm personally choosing to use a medium weight linen for this project. Also, when you're cutting things out, make sure that you also transfer your markings from the pattern piece to your fabric. So I'm using a tracing wheel and tracing paper to just mark out the pleats and also mark out the darts. Whatever tracing medium you're using though, make sure that it can be removed from the fabric after the fact, or just make sure that you make the markings in the seam allowance because you don't want those markings to be present when you're actually wearing the garment. Also make sure you're notching where the pattern calls for it. Now we're ready to start sewing. So I'm going to start first by lining up my pleats and pinning them in place, and I'm also going to do the same thing with my darts. So I'm just folding the pleats towards the side of the pants to the side seam, and I'm just pinning that in place. It's really important that you take your time with this and just make sure the pleats are laying the way you want them to, otherwise it can distort the shorts. So like I said, I'm also going to pin the darts in place so I can then bring that over to the sewing machine and sew those darts. And so I'm also just going to stay stitch the pleats in place so that those stay put while you're sewing the shorts. And to do this, I'm just stitching a basting stitch in the seam allowance. Then I'm just going to give the darts a nice press. Next, I'm just going to attach the interfacing to my fly shield and fly facing by just using my iron to fuse it together. And I'm going to fold the fly shield right sides together and sew along this curved line. So I'm just sewing with a 1/2 inch seam allowance, which is normal, and I'm going to trim it down to reduce the bulk. Then I'm going to flip it back right side out and give it a good press with my iron. Now I'm going to finish the curved edge of my fly facing, the open long edge of my fly shield, and the center front seams of my front pants. And here you can see more clearly which edges that I decided to finish. Now you don't have to use your serger, it's definitely recommended, but if you only have a sewing machine, I would recommend using an overlock stitch or zigzag stitches to finish it. Next, I'm going to place the fly facing at the center front seam of the left pant leg, and I'm going to sew it on with 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. I'm now going to notch in into the full 3/8 of an inch seam allowance so that these seam allowances on the front seam can be handled separately. I'm now going to flip the facing to the wrong side and just give it a good press and then top stitch this down at the edge. Next, I'm going to get my 6-inch zipper and place it face down on the fly facing. Make sure to line up the edge of the zipper with the edge of the center front seam. Grabbing only the zipper and the fly facing, I'm going to move the rest of the pants out of the way. I'm going to sew down just one side of the zipper tape, the side that is closest to the serged edge of the fly facing. Next, I'm taking my top stitching template and lining it up with the center seam of my pants, and then I'm just going to trace it out with some tailor's chalk. Be really light when you're tracing it out unless you're absolutely certain that your tracing medium will come out of your garment. Before I top stitch this down, I'm going to pin the other side of the zipper tape up and out of the way right there at the bottom so it doesn't get caught when you're top stitching this down. Now just top stitch on the line that you just marked and make sure that you take it easy around the curve. Now grab your fly shield and line up the serged edge with the edge of your zipper tape. Grab both of those in your hand and flip the rest of the shorts out of your way. Now I'm just going to stitch the zipper tape to the fly shield just right in the middle of that zipper tape on this side. After that, I'm going to bring the other side of the pants into play. I'm going to line it up with the left side of the pants, and I'm going to make a notch on the right side of the pants, exactly where that notch is on the left side. Now these seam allowances can be handled separately, so I'm going to take the upper portion of that seam allowance, fold it under 3/8 of an inch, and give it a nice press. After that, I'm going to place this on the exposed side of the zipper tape and line it up close to the zipper teeth, and then I'm just going to top stitch that in place. Next, I'm just going to fold under the top layer crotch seam 3/8 of an inch, and I'm just going to give that a good press. I'm going to place that directly over top of the other side of the crotch seam, and I'm just going to top stitch that in place to connect them. Now I'm going to pin and sew along the center back seam and then serge it to finish it. I'm also, of course, going to give it a good press. Next, I'm just going to serge all of the curved edges of the pockets. I'm not going to finish the straight edge. Again, you don't have to use your serger to finish things, but it's just what I'm choosing to do. After that, I'm just going to line up the top of the pocket with the notches we made at the side seam of the pants earlier, and I'm just going to sew those down. After that, I'm just going to serge down the side seams without trimming off any of the seam allowance. Now we're just going to understitch the pockets. So to do this, I'm going to flip the pockets open and then just top stitch about 1/8 of an inch away from that seam line, and this will just help keep the pockets towards the inside of the garment. Now we're ready to sew the side seam, so just place the front and back pants right sides together, and I'm going to sew along the side seams and around the pocket. So when I get to the intersection of the pocket and the side seam, I'm going to pivot, sew around the pocket, and then do the same thing for the rest of the side seam. So here you can see that I'm leaving my needle in, I'm lifting my presser foot, and then I'm pivoting my garment so I can continue sewing around the pockets. And here you can see me pivoting the garment again so I can continue sewing down the side seam. Now, of course, I'm going to press open my side seams, and to do this, I'm personally just going to clip into the seam allowance, so it's really easy for me to get in there and press the seam open and flat. Now I'm just going to pin, sew, serge, and press my inseam. Now I'm ready to create my belt loops. I'm personally going to use interfacing, but if you do not have a machine that can get through a lot of layers of fabric, I would not recommend using interfacing because it's going to make this fabric stiffer and a lot thicker. So it's really up to you if you think your machine can handle it. So I'm basically going to fold the belt loops in quarters. So I'm going to take the long edges, fold those towards the center, and then fold the belt loop in half after that so that it's in quarters and ready to be sewn. Now I'm just going to top stitch the belt loops along both of the long edges. After that, I'm going to sew 1 or 2 rows of basting stitches in the seam allowance of the waistline, and I'm going to do this so that we can ease in the waistline into the waistband later on. Now I'm just going to prep the waistband by attaching my interfacing by just fusing it together with an iron, and then after that I'm going to crease the waistband down the center. Now I'm going to use the basting stitches we sewed earlier just to pull and gather it slightly, not very much. I'm just going to gather it just like this so that we can kind of ease it into the waistband. Next, find the notches on your waistband and line that up with the very edge of the center front seam on the side that overlaps. I'm going to pin down the waistband to the waistline, and I'm also going to match the notch in the middle of the waistband to the center back seam of the pants. And also I'm going to make sure that the other end of the waistband hangs off 1/2 inch because that is our seam allowance. And we need that 1/2 inch so we can finish the waistband nicely. Next, I'm just kind of gathering the waistline a little bit more to make sure that it fits perfectly into that waistband. And then after I have it gathered nice and perfect, I'm just going to pin the remainder of the waistband down. Now we're going to add our belt loops. So I'm going to add 2 in the front, 2 on the side, and 2 in the back. And add the belt loops between the waistband and the actual pants. I like to do this after I've pinned the waistband because it just makes it a little bit easier to handle. Then we're going to go around and sew the entire waistband with a regular straight stitch. If you ease in the waistband properly and evenly, you should not see the gathers once you press the waistband. After that, I'm just going to tack down the belt loops to the body of the pants, just about 1/2 inch away from the seam line. Then I'm going to serge the free edge of my waistband, and I'm also going to serge the other edge of my waistband. This part is optional because it will be covered with the waistband when you finish it, but I just wanted to make sure it was all finished on the inside because linen does fray a lot. Now I'm going to fold the waistband in half along that crease we made earlier, just the opposite way with the right sides together. And I'm going to sew with a 1/2 inch seam allowance, which will be right up against the center front seam. After that, I'm just going to use my scissors to trim the bulk a little bit, and I'm going to flip it right side out, and you'll have a nice finished waistband at this edge. I'm going to repeat this process for the other side where there is an extended waistband. I'm going to use 1/2 inch seam allowance to sew. When I get to the corner, I'm going to place my needle in, lift up my presser foot, and pivot so that I can continue sewing. And I'm just going to sew until you meet the other stitch line at the waistband. Again, I'm going to use my scissors to trim the bulk before turning it right side out. Now we're going to secure the waistband by stitching in the ditch. So looking at it from the wrong side, we have our waistline seam pointing up into the waistband. The other edge of the waistband will come down and point downwards. And then you can see here that it kind of folds under, and it will look like that on both sides. So now we're ready to stitch in the ditch. And to stitch in the ditch, just place your needle right in the middle of that seam line and go very, very slowly and try to make your stitch invisible and hidden by that seam line. If you do this perfectly, you won't even realize that there's a line of stitches there. Now we're going to finish off the belt loop. So I'm going to turn under the edge 1/2 inch and place it at the edge of the waistband. Then I'm just going to use my sewing machine to tack that down. I'm going to sew front and back a few times. And I'm also going to do this on the other side so that it looks nice and flat. You can also use bar tacks if your sewing machine can handle it, or if your sewing machine can't handle sewing through these belt loops, then I would hand stitch. Now we're going to hem the short, so I have a 2-inch hem allowance included. You can do whatever you want with that hem allowance. You can fold it up 1 inch twice. I'm actually going to fold it up 1/2 inch once and then 1.5 inches for the second turn because I want that hem to be very wide but with minimum bulk. I'm pressing it first with my iron to make sure it's really easy when I go to sew it, and then I'm just going to top stitch that down. And then lastly, we're just going to add our closures. So right at the top of the zipper, I'm choosing to add a button and a buttonhole. I'm adding the buttonhole on the underlap and the button on the overlap so that the button is invisible and you won't be able to tell it's there. It's just there for some extra security. And then I'm just going to add a hook and eye bar at the edge of the extended waistband. So on the overlap, I'm going to add the hook, and then at the underlap, I'm going to add the bar. And then after that, you are done and you have yourself a new pair of shorts. Alright, so that is how you make these wide pleated shorts. I hope you guys love them as much as I do, and I hope you try out the pattern, and I hope you liked this tutorial. I just hope you liked everything. So if you did like it, feel free to give this video a thumbs up. It is the easiest way to support your favorite creators for free. Also, feel free to follow me on Instagram and TikTok. My handle is Kiana Bonolo. And yeah, thank you guys so much for watching. I'll see you guys next time. Bye!